So one thing I didn't realize, there's two radiator mounts on the bottom, but the only thing holding the radiator on the top was the hose that was connected here. So the radiator is very loose. On this side of the engine, on the passenger side of the engine, I started by taking out the two bolts right here and right here so that I could move this bracket over out of the way. Then I disconnected this air line right here that connects up here. Again, the air line was in the way. I didn't realize exactly how much stuff was going to be in the way. So when we got here, we had to do a lot more removing stuff than we had originally planned. When it came to the exhaust manifold, these first two bolts right here, the studs broke off. So we will have to replace those studs once we get the exhaust manifold off. Right now it just doesn't want to come off. Luckily the rest of the bolts, those three right there, the three on the other side, and the two down there, those all came off just fine, along with the three bolts that connect right down there. So those all came off just fine, and the carburetor came off just fine, so that was all good. The valve cover came off just fine. The coolant line on that side came off all right. So I used a thread protector thing on the spark plugs when I put the new spark plugs in. And I also used it on the plug wires, because if you remember correctly, the plug wires thread onto the spark plugs. But apparently it helped on the spark plugs a lot more than the plug wires, because most of these, the plug itself came out with instead of just coming off the plug wire. Meh, that's no big deal. We can just put the plugs in, put the plug wires back on later. It just made it slightly more difficult. The bolts for the side cover came off. We've got just one holding it right there that we can get to easily. We got another one down in here that's gonna be a little bit harder to get to, but not much. One down here that's behind this piece here that should be easy to get to with a wrench. And we got one down behind the generator that we need to move the generator in order to get to. So that's another thing we're doing today. This top mount here allows it to slide. However, the bottom mounts are tightened up so much that it can't actually slide. So what we need to do is we need to loosen this bottom mount right here, and there's another one back here. Loosen those two bottom mounts, that way this generator can rotate. We'll slide it forward, take the belts off, and then we'll slide it back, rotate it, so that we can get that last bolt out. From there, the valve cover should be able to come off, and we can replace, or the side cover, I mean. From there, the side cover can come off, and we can replace that side cover gasket. As far as the head goes and cleaning it up, we need to clean up the gasket areas, especially these coolant gaskets. We need to clean that area up, and then we need to make new gaskets. The valve cover, where the valve cover gasket is pretty clean, so that I think we can just wipe off and then put the new gasket on. So I've got the side cover gasket, and it's pre-cut, so it should just fit into place. Same with the head gasket itself. However, I couldn't get the intake and exhaust manifold gaskets So I got the gasket material and I need to cut it to the right size. Same with the valve cover. I got the gasket material and I need to cut it to the right size. So, an update on how things are going. The head gasket is still over there in the box, and we got the head here. Yesterday we were cleaning up the head and we found a small crack right there. Between the first and second cylinder, right where the head gasket blew. Now, it is not very deep on this side, but it is a lot deeper on this side, but you can't see that because of the light. So, it's hard to see. It's small, but it's there. Now, like I said, it doesn't look too bad on this side, but then over here, it looks like it goes a lot deeper. And that's a problem. When we removed all the bolts from the exhaust manifold, we tried to take the exhaust manifold off and it was not coming off. We tried prying it as much as we were comfortable prying it while it was attached to the truck. But anyway, yeah, we tried prying it, we tried pulling it off, and it would not come off the truck. So we had to remove the exhaust manifold and the head as one piece. Now that exhaust manifold is cast iron, and if you know anything about cast iron is heavy. And so that about doubled the weight of the cylinder head. Now I did determine that I can lift the cylinder head myself when it's just the head. I was able to lift it myself. It's kind of awkward because it's so large, but I could do it. It's easy enough. I definitely couldn't lift it up to the level of where the truck is. But with the addition of the exhaust manifold on top of the cylinder head, there was no way that the two of us would be able to lift it down from the truck safely. So we started looking around, started thinking about how we were going to get this cylinder head off. And I took some measurements and discovered that the engine crane that we have in the garage was tall enough to reach the cylinder head. Initially, like I said, I initially thought about replacing the head gasket in the military way, which would be to remove the entire engine and then take it all apart and then replace what you need to and put it all back together. And at some point, I would like to go through and completely rebuild an engine, either that particular one or another one. But anyway, I didn't know whether the engine crane that we have would actually be able to reach up to the engine. So an engine crane is a device, it's usually on wheels. So the engine crane that we had was actually tall enough to reach the head. So if the side of the truck is here, that's the tire, that's the fender of the truck and the tire. It was actually tall enough to reach that, and was actually long enough too, because that's the other thing. It was a little bit hard with the tire. The stabilizers on the engine crane had to go on either side of the tire, so it was a little bit hard to maneuver the crane, but it was tall enough that we could use it to lift the cylinder head and the exhaust manifold up, and we're actually able to set it onto a hand truck, a little cart that we use to pull the cylinder head around. So that's how we got the cylinder head off of the truck. We used an engine crane because it was just a little bit too much for us to do by hand. And unfortunately, I had a little GoPro right here set up to film, but with the little GoPro camera thing that I have, it's a GoPro, it's not a name brand, of course, but anyway, with the little camera I have, seems like I always forget to turn it on, or if I turn it on, I forget to press record and make sure that it's recording, and I don't know. So anyway, I wasn't able to get that footage. So once the cylinder head was on the ground, we were able to do some more prying and was actually able to get the exhaust manifold detached from the cylinder head. Unfortunately, in that process, a piece of the exhaust manifold broke off. We also discovered some cracks on the exhaust manifold. So we took the exhaust manifold to a local machine shop. They welded up all the cracks, welded the little piece back on, and we got it back, got it cleaned up, and then we started cleaning up the cylinder head. And as we were cleaning up the cylinder head, getting ready to replace the gasket, we were about halfway through. We'd been working for quite a while, and we thought we were on the home stretch. And just as we were cleaning up the cylinder head, we found a crack. So the cylinder head was cracked right about where the head gasket blew, right between the number 1 and number 2 cylinder. This crack, we didn't see it at first. We only saw it once we started to clean up the surface of the head in preparation for putting it all back together. The crack seemed larger on the number 2 cylinder side than on the number 1 cylinder side. It seemed very small, but a crack is a crack. We had a decision, and with all of my decisions, I really like to plan things out. So, option 1. We could replace the cylinder head. Another option, we could try to repair the cylinder head. Option 3 is we could put everything back together without repairing or replacing the cylinder head, just sticking it all back together and hope it works. So we'll call that ignore. So those were our 3 options, and there was a 4th option of leaving the truck taken apart until we could figure out one of these options. But I didn't like the option of leaving the truck torn apart for any length of time, because the longer it sits while it's torn apart, the more chance there is for rust to develop in the cylinders. There's more of a chance for stuff to go wrong, more of a chance for bolts to come up missing, for you to forget how it goes together. And so I started the project with a running truck. At least it sort of ran. I wanted to finish the project with a running truck, or at least sort of running. So, replacements. This truck, this engine, is getting harder and harder to find. Now, they made a lot of them. Rio made a lot of these engines. They were in a lot of different trucks over the years. A lot of the military versions, but they also had civilian versions of this engine. And so somewhere out there has to be a ton of these engines just sitting around. Unfortunately, a lot of these engines ended up in other trucks. Like, they would swap these engines. This was essentially the Cummins swap of the late 1950s. So these engines were put into all sorts of trucks, and who knows where those trucks are. Apparently a lot of them were used in logging trucks. A lot of these engines were used in logging trucks, and so a lot of the logging trucks, when they broke down, they just kind of left them. So I'm sure that there's a ton of these engines just sitting in the woods somewhere, but nobody knows where they are, and that's the problem. So getting a replacement cylinder head was going to be difficult. Luckily, I had a source. The place where I got the a head gasket. I called them up and they had 2 heads in stock. I was able to find a replacement fairly easily. However, shipping the replacement was going to be difficult because it's a large, heavy object. It would have to be shipped via truck, and so you would have to have a commercial address because freight shipping, typically they want a commercial address. They don't want to deliver to someone's house. You also need someone there to receive the thing, and you need some means of taking it off the truck. So those were 3 things, and I am able to overcome those things, but it's still quite a hassle. And also it would take a while to ship, and we were running short on time. So we looked into options for repairing. We talked to a couple of different machine shops to get the head repaired, and we talked to an engine builder that specializes in race engines to see if that was something that he would be willing to take on. Unfortunately, he wasn't. So we ended up taking the head to the person who fixed the exhaust manifold. When I picked up the exhaust manifold, we were talking about the project, and I said, yeah, the head is cracked and I can't figure out I can't find a guy to repair it. And he was like, well, we can try and repair it. You know, he said no guarantees, but we can at least try it out and see what happens. And so we were able to repair it. Basically, they welded up that crack and ground everything down so that it was nice and smooth, and they repaired the head. So we were able to get it repaired. That's the option we went with, because we could get it done fairly cheap. We could get it done fast. They were able to get it in so that we could get it out and get the truck back together. So we decided to go with the repair rather than ignore, because it was, at the end of the day, if this weld fails and the truck doesn't run right, we can still replace the head later on. But if the repair does work, it's a lot better option than just ignoring it. And so if worst comes to worst, that crack will open up again. It might ruin another head gasket. But it shouldn't cause much more damage. It shouldn't cause any damage to the block. And so what we did was sort of in between ignore and repair, because we did technically repair it, but we knew that it was possible that this repair wasn't going to work, and so we were sort of in that territory. The other problem we came across is broken off studs. We got this one out, but this one broke off closer to the block. So that's going to have to be drilled and extracted. Same with the stud for where the bolt was missing for the coolant passageway. That one will also have to be drilled and tapped in order to replace that bolt. Otherwise, we could put it back together without that bolt. I mean, it was working fine without that bolt for how long? It just leaked some coolant. So I mentioned that a couple of the exhaust manifold studs broke off. This was a problem because you need the studs in order to reattach the exhaust manifold. So we extracted the studs that had broken off. There were 3 studs that had broken off. 2 of them were exhaust manifold studs, and one of them was for the coolant rail. I mentioned in one of the videos, I think, that there was a bolt missing from there. It turns out that the bolt wasn't missing, it had broken off. So we, 2 of the studs, the bolt for the coolant and one of the exhaust manifold bolts, it had broken off so close to the head that we had to drill them and extract them, and then we had to retap the holes. The third one, we were able to use a stud extractor, and we were able to extract that stud without having to drill it and tap it. So then we cleaned the threads on all the studs. We ground down all the gasket surfaces, shined everything up, and then we put the truck back together. Unfortunately, when we put it back together, we ran into some more problems, which I will discuss in a later video. And it turns out that we can't take that side cover off until we take the distributor off. So after we put the head back on, we're gonna take off the distributor and take off that side cover in order to replace the gasket. That is unfortunate. I was hoping to avoid that, but apparently it cannot be removed until you remove the distributor. The distributor is just in the way. So that's where we're at with that. I need to remove those two studs that are broken off. I need to replace these studs. I will probably be replacing them with bolts, because I'm not sure if I can easily find studs that are that long with the right threads. This stud right here, we have that, so we will be probably putting that back in. And then these two up here are actually bolts, not studs. And so we will be putting those bolts back in. For the intake and exhaust manifold and some other parts, I have those soaking right here in brake clean to clean up the rust, clean up the threads, so that this thing should go back together fairly easy.